Well, after I left school, I decided to take a year out before going to university, and I decided that I was going to spend this year working on computer games. I finished Rebel Star Raiders and I started work on Chaos. And I was working on Chaos all the way up to the point I went to university. And I was still working on it while I was there at the London School of Economics. And Chaos was my first assembly language game, and it was a major effort on my part because I didn't know the programming language. And the final game did, of course, have a number of interesting bugs in it, which reflect my limited experience with the language. But it was a very interesting project to work on. Chaos actually originated as a card game. When I was at school about 1980, I watched a couple of people playing a game called Warlock, which was a Games Workshop game. I never actually played the game because they didn't let me, but the thing that interested me was that you had these spells and they were on cards, and you had a hand of cards in your hand which only you could see. And I thought, well, I can make my own game, so I made a little board game involving cards with the spells on the cards. And actually everything was on the cards, your wizard on the card, but it had manoeuvring, so you had a board and your wizards would move around and you cast gooey blobs and fires which would spread, and you'd summon dragons which could breathe fire. And I played this board game such a lot with a lot of friends, so I thought it'd be great to make this a computer game. And then a friend of mine, Andy Green, who actually was the programmer for Islandia and Time Laws, he made a version of the BBC Model B, but it was such a complicated game that you can only do it in text mode, so all the creatures were represented like blocks of like 4 characters. It looked really ugly, but it was a basic version of the game, and I thought, well, I really got to come back to this. So when I got my Spectrum, after doing Rebel Star Raiders, I thought, I've really got to go back to Chaos. I knew it had to be in assembly language because the game was very sophisticated. I needed to be much more efficient with memory and the graphics. And I started implementing basically the board game that I had, and it was a multiplayer game, and you could have up to 8 players in it. But the interesting thing was that any of those players in the game could be controlled by the AI. Had a lot of randomness in it because the spell selection was random. This is going back to the original card game where you literally shuffled the deck of cards of spells and dealt them out to each player. And it worked out really well on the computer as well, and people really enjoyed, in particular, playing together, like 2 or 3 people versus like 5 AI computer wizards. And aptly, the name Chaos is very descriptive of what the games could actually become. And when I was working on the game, Redshift sort of ceased to exist, and the guys at Redshift decided to try and publish some of their remaining titles actually through Games Workshop. And this was Games Workshop's first move actually into computer games publishing. So Chaos was published by Games Workshop as one of actually their first computer games. And I think it was their first original computer game, not actually based on one of their board games. And it was again in a nice big presentation, nice big box. I got a bit of pressure on me to finish it because it was going to be published by Games Workshop, and I had a guy called Angus who would come on his motorbike to visit me at the halls of residence and say, is it done yet? Can I have another tape? And he would keep visiting me until I got the game done. It was a little bit rushed at the end because I was at college, I was supposed to be studying, but I had to basically sit in my dorm for a whole week just trying to finish it before I could get back to my studies. I don't know how well the game did. I'm not sure really of the impact of the game until much later, when I got a lot of demands from people to make a sequel, and which became Lords of Chaos. Lords of Chaos is a kind of sequel to the original Chaos, but what I wanted to do with the game was set it much more firmly in a sort of RPG framework. So the idea was that you would have multiple scenarios, multiple adventures or missions, and you would carry the same character forward from one mission to the next. It was a little bit difficult with the Spectrum because it meant that you had to load and save your character separately on tape, and then you had to load up the next mission. It kind of worked. And you could actually configure your wizard character. You could choose your spells, and then you level him up through experience points. So again, it's going back to my influence from Dungeons and Dragons, an attempt to create a sort of real sort of tactical RPG style game, but with the same theme of chaos. You know, you're a wizard, you're casting spells, and you need to eliminate the enemy wizards. I was very pleased with Laws of Chaos. As a technical achievement on the Spectrum, it was quite difficult. The game did have its problems, for sure. It was quite a long game to play. I remember when we were playing multiplayer games with up to 4 people, the game would take hours. It was really quite an in-depth game. It was quite sophisticated. You had inventory for each creature. Creatures could pick up things and carry things around. You could make potions from ingredients you found on the maps. Had a number of interesting random elements. For example, random deployment of the objects and items that you could find. Had a big exploration element of the map. I think for 8-bit games it was very ambitious, and I was very pleased with the result. And it did certainly have an audience of, particularly for people who like role-playing games, D&D and that kind of thing. It was, I think, a big success.